I think when you really start to like think about it, I just had a kid. It's like, can you imagine this happening? Like how would you start to put a number on like a part of your family losing their life in the way? It's like honestly kind of incomprehensible. And like there's a bit of me which goes, man, this is like probably got to be one of the hardest parts of being a lawyer if you are put in a case like this, is actually helping to put a number on like what ends up being where you settle.
Yeah, and it is. And the way you do it, though, again, is you're exactly right. You spend tons of time with the family. You see what the impact has been on their lives, and you start building the narrative around that.
Ever wonder what really happens when your rights are violated and what you can do about it? Ever wonder what the law looks like outside of TV dramas and headlines? Meet Quinn Mayberry, a Harvard-trained trial lawyer who has helped individuals recover millions of dollars, and Alex Lobert, Quinn's lifelong friend and your law translator-in-chief, here to make the law make sense. On this show, they cover headline-making legal battles and overlook cases to show you how to fight back and win. This is Legally Curious.
Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Quinn. We have a heavy one per usual. Today, we're going to talk about the murder of George Floyd. I know, not a particularly sunny topic. However, we really thought it was important to actually shine a light on the civil side of that case. I feel like a lot of people know the criminal portion of it, where 4 officers, the most famous of which being Derek Chauvin, were convicted of killing George Floyd, a Minneapolis man, back in 2020. At the same time as the criminal proceedings, though, there also were civil proceedings where the family was suing, not only the officers, but also the city of Minneapolis. And that's one of those things as a non-lawyer, I think is always a little bit confusing to me. We often hear about the criminal side of things. That's what gets shown on TV often, and, Criminal Minds and all these things. But there often are civil cases as well, because whenever that happens, whenever you are murdered, usually your rights are violated as well. So we're going to shine a light on that today.
Let's get into it.
All right, Quinn, though, really, really fast, I want to just lighten it up with one little story.
Yeah, I think this episode needs that. So whatever you got.
Just a tiny bit of levity to start.
Yeah.
So I'm actually preparing for this episode in a coffee shop. So I'm sitting there. I'm in my neighborhood of Wicker Park, writing, doing some research. And I feel like people don't really talk in coffee shops anymore. Everyone's got their headphones in. They're paying attention to their own thing. Of course, this time, like the woman next to me, like you'd have a sip for coffee. She looks over, she's like, "You look nice. Like, what are you working on? How's it going?" And like literally my face I'm like, of course you asked me right now. So like, I should have lied maybe if I looked around like, well, I'm researching for a podcast about the murder of George Floyd. And I have never seen someone like sip their coffee, blink a few times and be like, I am so sorry that she would look so upset that she'd asked me.
She's
like, what happened?
You don't have the decency to lie to me right now. I'm having a pleasant Saturday morning and you're going to drop that on me.
I know, for someone who is like such a strong proponent of like people should be talking more at places like third spaces like this.
Yes,
I ruined it.
I know, you're like,
yeah.
This is why we can't have that. This is why we can't have nice conversations in third places.
I know, weirdos like me are doing podcasts on for murder of George Floyd. Could have been like blowing up a Pinto, and it would have been so much better.
Yeah, exactly. It's like.
All right, Quinn. So let's go back and make sure everyone has the context here. So it's 2020 and we're in Minneapolis. George Floyd is suspected of using counterfeit money. And so 4 officers approach him in his car. They end up pulling him out of his car and essentially ultimately wrestling him to the ground during kind of a little bit of during the arrest. And Derek Chauvin famously in this situation puts his knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes prior to him ultimately passing away.
It's
Now,
worth noting
okay.
that George Floyd was handcuffed at the time and hadn't moved for several minutes. So I guess really important in the context, not just so the public knows what's happening, but also in the legal context. It's like those facts are extremely important because arguments like
Absolutely.
resisting arrest become extremely weak.
Yeah, hard to resist when you're not moving.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the 4 officers that were involved were charged with criminal cases. Derek Chauvin was the most famous of which. He also ultimately got actually 21 years, a 21-year sentence for the murder of George Floyd. The rest of the officers also were charged with, other abetting and, helping with essentially that murder. But then again, the family of George Floyd actually sues the officers as well as the city of Minneapolis. Now, Quinn, do you want to actually maybe just dive in? Like, what were they suing for? What is the civil part of a case like this?
Yeah, so they were suing under Section 1983, which is what you do in these types of cases where you're bringing civil rights claims. To successfully bring a claim under Section 1983, you basically have to prove 2 things. One, that the actor was acting under the color of state law. So that becomes relevant in cases where it's against, a federal officer, for example. And typically people don't bring Section 1983 claims against ICE officers, for example. But in a case like this, it's a total non-question. These officers were clearly acting under the color of state law. They're, city employees who are wearing their uniforms and are in the regular course of their duties throughout a shift. So not even a close call in a case like this. The second thing you have to prove is that there was a deprivation of a constitutional right. So was there an unreasonable seizure, or was unreasonable force used, or excessive force? Is there a violation of their 4th Amendment rights or their 14th Amendment right? In this situation, there was pretty clearly excessive force. The defense might argue otherwise, but I don't think that whenever the rubber meets the road, and if you're in trial over a case like this, it's not even really the point they're going to argue. They just lose too much credibility with the jury. So they're not arguing whether or not, there was excessive force. Where they'd really try and defend a case like this is in essentially 2 ways. One, they would argue that there's qualified immunity. So basically with qualified immunity, you have to prove that there was fair warning. And the way you do that is there is a prior case or prior case law where that specific conduct was deemed unconstitutional. This can be a really high bar. You don't have to have the exact same fact pattern, and courts have interpreted this differently, but the fact pattern has to be sufficiently similar to a prior constitutional violation. If you can't find a prior violation that's sufficiently similar, then these government actors, these police officers, the city, can be shielded by that qualified immunity. The second thing that the city is going to try and defend on is what's known as a Monell defense. So typically, employers have some level of liability for their employees, just as a general rule, whether it's government or, in private industry. There are exceptions in the government context, though, where you don't have this same respondeat superior or this third-party liability for your employees just as a matter of fact. What you have to do is you have to prove that there was a policy, practice, or custom that caused this violation. So if the individual officers are liable, that's fine and well. The Monell defense doesn't really apply. But to get the city to also be civilly liable, you have to defeat a Monell defense. And again, the way you do that is by proving that there's policy, practice, or custom that caused this violation. That can also be hard to prove. The ways you do it are either one, you've got an explicit unconstitutional policy. So they have some policy where it's like, on first contact with a suspect, shoot them. It's like you don't see that very often, but that would be clearly
can't do that.
Yeah, you can't do that. And so you will see this from time to time. Not something that egregious, obviously, but there is like an out and out unconstitutional policy. There is that directly violates case law that has established some constitutional right. You definitely see it. But what's more common is they prove these policies, practices, or customs by showing a widespread practice, a deliberate indifference to a pattern of violations, or through a failure to train. Yeah, so that kind of wraps up how you prove the claim, what some of the common defenses are, and how you defeat some of those common defenses.
Right. And so in this case, the 1983 claim, the Monell municipal liability claim, and also failure to train all came into effect.
Yeah, and the failure to train is a Monell claim.
Got it. So it's nested underneath the Monell claim.
Yeah,
Got
exactly.
It. So Quinn, can you actually talk also about why do you sue the city as well?
Absolutely.
What's the purpose of that?
Yeah, so there are basically two reasons. One, accountability. This is where you get the biggest changes. If the city has to pay for it, sometimes they'll explicitly change policies as part of settlement agreements, or if nothing else, the awareness that is brought to the case because of these big verdicts, they'll change policies. Something else I've seen is insurers will have specific requirements or they'll price in these violations. So they have these long-term consequences of a big verdict. So basically, one is accountability. You name the city for accountability. Two, for the individual plaintiff or for their family in a wrongful death case, this is how they actually have some recourse. This is how they actually get paid the damages that they're due. These individual officers, so the settlement in this case was $27 million. I don't know a single thing about the financial background of these officers. I would bet you some good money that they can't put up $27 million. Who can? The city. And so it's kind of those two reasons. The loftier goal being the accountability and the policy changes that come from that accountability. And then the second is just so that family can get some justice.
Right. There's obviously individual liability here that gets proven like multiple ways here, surrounding the situation. But to your point, there also are clear, pretty systemic things that also need to be adjusted. This usually does not happen totally in a vacuum. It absolutely can. But oftentimes there are more systemic things here. And by suing the city, you can have those kind of bigger changes that hopefully make sure this doesn't happen again with somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then at the same time, to your point, I think that's another thing, which in the back of my head as a non-lawyer, I kind of know, but rarely comes to the forefront, which is, yeah, you can sue someone for $27 million. If they don't have $27 million, then you're not getting $27 million. It's not like there's some magic fund out there for everyone with lawsuits that, can't pay for their lawsuits. Yeah. You're only going to get as much money as the person has.
Yeah. And to be clear, significantly less than the person has, because there are certain bankruptcy protections. There are certain things that wouldn't come into the suit. So it's yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
Right. At the risk of sounding reductionist here, it's like you don't want to get hit by a beater. You'd rather get hit by a fancy car. Hopefully they've, got a little more cash there.
Well, I guess I don't want to take us on too much of a tangent here, but just remember it's typically the insurance paying for that though. So
true.
Doesn't matter what car they're driving, 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 times out of 100, probably 99 times out of 100, it is going to be the insurance that is covering the entirety of the money that is being paid in a situation like that.
All right. Sidebar legal advice.
Well, but the only reason I go there though is because I think that oftentimes there's this misconception that there's like, oh, you don't want to punish that person. It's like, well, that's why they've been paying for insurance their whole life. It's like, it's right. So that they have coverage for situations like this.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, not legal advice, legal fun information, just so we're clear.
Yes. Thank you. Alex, are you my lawyer?
Yeah. I'm learning.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm learning. So, all right. Quinn, do you want to, okay, let's dive in. So ultimately what ends up happening here is this is an incredibly fast settlement. So it goes from the Floyds bringing this case against the city of Minneapolis to a settlement within 10 months. And the Minneapolis City Council approved a payment of $27 million to the estate of Floyd's next of kin. And they actually also earmarked $500,000 to the community around 38th in Chicago. So kind of one of the communities involved with this. I think, can you talk me through one, just like, how do these settlements work? How do you get to a number like 27 million? And I realize, you weren't in the room, but you give maybe like what you understand about what happened here, but also I'd love to hear a little bit about how do you think about cases like this?
A case settling in 10 months, a big case settling within 10 months is incredibly rare. There are times in LA where it'll take over a year from the point of a tentative settlement for the plaintiff to even get paid, to even get that final approval from the claims board or the board of supervisors. And so, yeah, incredibly quick. Why did that happen? Basically 2 reasons: the publicity, the national news, and the fact that it was coming up on the heels of a criminal trial, which gave the plaintiffs more leverage. There was just going to be additional news coverage and bad facts were likely to come out. The city was inclined to get this case resolved. Now, with regard to the $27 million, the way you get to a number like that is typically going to be in one of 2 ways. There's either punitive damages or the risk of punitive damages, or what you see far more often than that is enormous non-economic damages. So the impact to that person's, their life or their family's life, and these things that are just truly irreplaceable and lead to enormous numbers. There are basically 2 categories of damages. There are those non-economic damages, and then there are also economic damages. For economic damages, you'd prove that out by having, if the person were still alive, a life care planner and an economist that adjusts for that. Or in a case like this, where it's a wrongful death case, you've got an economist that's going to talk about future earning potential, things like that, adjust that for net present value, run the calculations. But, this case wasn't ultimately tried, so we don't see how they were breaking those numbers down and how they were arguing about it. But what I can guarantee you of is most of the damages in a case like this are coming from those non-economic damages. It's the, families growing up without their dad or their brother or this, a loved one. And the damages are enormous, And so that's where most of them are coming from. Okay, how I would put together damages arguments for a case like this. Again, most of it's going to come from the non-economic damages. What you do is you begin to tell the story of the impact to the family. You don't overplay the story. You tell an honest accounting of what this has done to the family. Really, that's where the best plaintiffs' attorneys shine. It's there are plenty of people who understand these legal arguments. It's the people who are able to tell those stories and do so in a way that the defense realizes is going to resonate with a jury of 12 people, and they get nervous about it. This case, plaintiffs had a ton of leverage because the story was so tragic and because it was getting so much attention.
I think you really, to your point, have to put yourself in the shoes of this family. And right, the best lawyers actually do that. And they make you reckon with and think about the implications of this. And to your point, it is, yes, there are ways to assess economic damages. And at the same time, the non-economic is so hard, but also so real. I think when you really start to like think about it, I just had a kid. It's like, can you imagine this happening? Like how would you start to put a number on like a part of your family losing their life in the way? It's like, honestly, kind of incomprehensible. And like, there's a bit of me which goes, man, this is like probably gotta be one of the hardest parts of being a lawyer. If you are put in a case like this, is actually helping to put a number on like what ends up being where you settle.
Yeah, and it is. And the way you do it, though, again, is you're exactly right. You spend tons of time with the family. You see what the impact has been on their lives, and you start building the narrative around that. It's as both as simple and as complicated as that.
All right, Quinn, I have one question for us just to noodle on for a second. Do you think it was more important to sue the city than even Derek Chauvin? I love your take on that.
Yeah, so from a legal posturing perspective, you absolutely need to sue Derek Chauvin. But yeah, I think that suing the city as well is arguably much more important. Again, it comes back to those two things we were talking about before, where it's one, the accountability, and two, somebody that can actually make good on the damages here and actually pay the family. But on that accountability point, you see all of these ripple effects that come from these big judgments. They have action plans to prevent it from happening again. Sometimes there are actual like concrete policy changes. Their insurers oftentimes put pressure on them if they're insured, if not, oftentimes government employees will lose jobs. They have to address it. And so, yeah, I think systemically, absolutely, it's incredibly important to also sue the city in cases like this. It's where you get the most systemic change.
All right, Quinn. So to wrap it up, I don't know, do you have any like takeaway thoughts here as you're thinking about this case, especially obviously in the current climate that we're in today?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say the deck can sometimes feel stacked against plaintiffs who have been wronged in these types of cases. There can be high bars that they have to get over. Some of those defenses we talked about, like qualified immunity. But there's something that can be done. I mean, this case is some evidence of that, right? It's like there was criminal liability and civil liability to the tune of $27 million. It is, I guess what I would say is, in trying times, it can be incredibly tempting to start taking a bit of a defeatist mindset. Let this case prove that there's something that can be done about it, and there's a way to keep trying to fight these systems. And 1983 claims are an incredibly powerful tool.
I couldn't say it better, Quinn. So if you were the person who was sitting next to me in the coffee shop, I apologize, first of all, for potentially ruining your day. But I hope that you maybe saw this episode. Maybe you...
well, I can't help but think now we're just... we're forcing this upon the rest of the world. We're making the rest of the world that person in the coffee shop. No, if people want to know more about this, they need to know what happened and they need to have resources. So
absolutely. If I see her again, I will, I'll potentially, I'll be like, hey, look, this is what we did. I'm sorry. But look what came out of this.
She's like, I didn't ask twice now.
Yeah, right. She's like literally gonna be. She's never coming back.
Let's see this for the people who are searching for George Floyd content, who are ready to go there.
Exactly. All right, and if you want to know a little more about this, we had a great episode with Alejandro Barrientos about Can You Sue ICE? I believe that's the title of the video, right, Quinn?
Yeah, that's right, and that covers something parallel to these 1983 claims, which is the Federal Tort Claims Act, the FTCA claims, where you can thereby sue federal employees, not just state and local employees.
Right. So if you want to know more about this topic, really cool episode. Alejandro is like, it was amazing. There was a moment where I'm like, am I talking to Neil Katyal? What's going on here? So give that one a listen.
Check it out.
And but honestly, we're going to keep doing these. This is a ton of fun for us. So thanks for your support. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, and we'll be back in future weeks.
Thanks, everybody.
If your rights have been violated, give Mayberry Law a call at 310-776-3764. It's free, and we would love to discuss what you can do. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice or create an attorney-client relationship. For specific legal guidance, consult a qualified attorney